Ladies and gentlemen, don't look now, but the Philadelphia 76ers have officially arrived this season. Me and Jacob Moreno are back on the sticks here on Sixers Digest, here to break down what went right this time here on Christmas Day as the Philadelphia 76ers produced a statement victory over the Celtics. So, Jacob, we've had some tough times, me and you, hopping on this channel talking about this team this season. I want to toss to you right off the bat. What was your level of surprise for that victory yesterday, and just what's your spirit right now?
To be honest, I was kind of shocked. I mean, the win still feels as fresh as ever. I'm still personally enjoying it very much. It's just like the tip off just ended. I'm just like, it was such a great game. It was completely unexpected. Like I thought the Celtics was going to win. I thought that 5 out offense would be an issue for Embiid, and it was in the first quarter. But the way the Sixers just able to match up with them and utilize that lineup with Caleb Martin and Kelly Oubre, it just felt like they were ready for Boston in times and like years past that they really weren't before. So I love how they were able to keep up with them from the perimeter. I love the ball movement, and even the defense was amazing. I think Embiid's defense down the stretch went really overlooked because of Caleb Martin's heroics, and that's a whole other conversation of itself. I think, I feel really good about this win. I think the starting five, like this is the starting five that we've
Yeah.
been waiting to see since literally July, and we saw it against arguably the best team in the NBA. And they really did like shock the entire nation at this point. So yeah, it was truly just a great win.
Yeah, 100% there. And I do believe there's something to this, that I do not think this was a fluke victory by this team. I think this was something that they're finally getting back to the team they were designed to be. This is now 8 of the last 11. They have a winnable stretch for this West Coast trip. We could be looking at a pretty different outlook for the season if things break right there. But let's stick on the Christmas Day matchup for now to highlight a couple performances right here. Let's start with Tyrese Maxey himself. And the overall stats that he finished with 33 points, did add 12 assists there, 3 steals in the matchup, shot 3 of 9 from 3, 12 of 23 from the floor. Thought he was especially impressive defensively, to be perfectly honest, and I think that's been more of a season-long takeaway from Tyrese. I also think he's developed a little bit of a nastiness that I did not, or I wasn't confident that he had in him. Saw the quote flying around, or the report from one of the Celtics reporters, that Maxey basically yelled to get Sam Hauser off the court after he knocked down a 3 in front of him there. So for me, I'm kind of noticing this being more of a trend, that it feels like the fate of the franchise is a little bit heavier on the shoulders of Tyrese Maxey than I expect to be the case this soon. I understand, obviously, the Joel Embiid situation speaks for itself, and we will touch on that pregame situation with him yesterday as well. But I do think that they're giving the keys to Maxey a little bit more offensively than I expect to be the case. And I think defensively, he's like night and day better than last year. So what are you seeing from Maxey both yesterday and just in general on the season, Jacob?
Yesterday, he was just completely phenomenal. You mentioned his defense. He had a really few impressive stints against Tatum, where I think the Celtics tried to target him a little bit, and he really did hold his own. And offensively, it really just was an amazing all around offensive performance. The pick and pop with Embiid and Yabusele worked to perfection.
Hmm.
Tyrese Maxey made a lot of crisp reads, and he was also maintaining that level of aggressiveness that has allowed him to be so effective as a dynamic threat. Obviously, right there, 25.4 points per game, and that's really just reflective of the player he's been this past few games. And I really think that the turning point was almost when we started our last show, because that's when they played the Bulls, and that's when he notched his first career triple double.
Yeah.
And I felt like from there he just has not kept his foot off the gas. Like he's put his foot right on the gas. He's just been completely dominant. We've seen him just be so much more decisive, so much more aggressive, and just so much more of an overall impactful player than we've seen in those first like 20-ish games of the season. And I think Embiid's presence has had a lot to do with that. Like he just seems so much more comfortable and so much more confident, and he's really just blossomed into arguably the best player on the Sixers this season, in my opinion.
Yeah, for real. And as far as the defense conversation there, I think last year I fought the battle that I thought Tyrese Maxey was at least a league average defender. I'm ready to fight the battle that he's more than that at this point. We're talking about guys like Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown that he's matching up with. I think he's done a really like focused and nice job of getting his hands everywhere basically in as many passing lanes as possible, being active. And these are guys like obviously there are going to be matchups in which he's limited. We know the size disadvantage for a 6'2" guard, and I thought the Celtics tried to exploit that a lot yesterday. That I thought they did their best to get Jason Tatum in 1-on-1, get Jaylen Brown to take him, and they certainly got theirs in stretches there. But I think the fact that there is this level of resistance from Maxey really speaks to that, and I think really increases the ceiling and floor of this entire Sixers team because he can't just be a guy that gets bullied. So do you think that there is something to this that is legitimate, and do you agree with me that he's above a league average defender at this point in time?
I would say slightly above because, as
Okay,
you said, there is matchups where his lack of
sure.
size does definitely get taken advantage of. But no, he's been a really solid defender this season, especially with the expectations. Like throughout his career, we've known him to be this amazing offensive player with defensive limitations, which is the case with a lot of smaller guards.
Yeah.
But I think Tyrese Maxey has definitely overperformed his defensive expectations. He's done a really good job of forcing turnovers and reading passing lanes, similar to how Allen Iverson used to make a defensive impact. So that part of his defense has really like impressed me a lot. Offensively, though, like I do want to mention, I forgot to mention in the first segment, like he's just taking over down the stretch.
Yeah.
Like these past few games against the Spurs, against the Celtics, like the Sixers fully relied on him to score, and he delivered. Obviously, Maxey had those two straight turnovers in the last 2 minutes of last night's game. But still, regardless, his scoring, his shot making, it's just been so impressive. And when you add that defensive layer to it, he really is making a case to be like an all NBA caliber guard. That might be a little bit of a stretch, but if we can continue to see this big three healthy, he might have a shot at 13 if he keeps up this elite two-way impact.
Yeah, I
Maybe
100.
maybe at least stretching it, but I mean, who knows?
I agree with it. I think there's a case to be made, and obviously still a
Mhm.
lot more basketball to be played this year. But to kind of piggyback off that, and we will get back to the positivity here. But I see the comments, and shout out to Jamal Childs with the question saying, "Good evening. First question: how can we incorporate PG into a consistent, productive role?" So that is the third piece of the big three that you just mentioned there. To kind of touch on what he produced yesterday, not an overly exciting output offensively. 12 points. He added four assists, did have 4 rebounds and 3 steals. Shot 0 for 7 from three. Not what you want to see there. And I think, unfortunately, sort of the story that is becoming with Paul George. For starters, we're not doing the Tobias Harris conversation because he's just so much more impactful defensively than Tobias ever has been a single day in his entire life. But it is fair to assess that I've been a little bit underwhelmed with what we've seen from Paul George to this point. I'm not ready to sound the panic alarm or be panicked, but I do think there needs to be a little bit more concentrated effort to get this guy in the flow stage where you see him just getting to his spots and getting so comfortable. So, what's your takeaway from Paul George? How did the Sixers fix this, and what is your level of concern right now?
I'm going to start with just his performance last night as a whole. I didn't like his shot selection
Yeah.
whatsoever. Nick Nurse disagrees with me, but frankly, I really don't care. A lot of the times he would just get in the fast break and just settle for a long two, which I hate to say it, but kind of gave me some Tobias Harris trauma. But no, other than that, it was just poor shot making. I mean, he did settle for a lot of, bad shots in the mid range, and I feel like though the ball movement was really solid last night, the ball often stopped when he got it in post position, and it was just frankly just a performance you can't have. Like I don't care if you can give me 33 against the Hornets. I want at least an efficient 22 against the Celtics, and he just failed to deliver that. I think it is, again, one game. It's a very small sample size. Paul George, even though he has played a good amount of games, he hasn't really faced a lot of great teams. So we will have to see how his performance translate in a playoffs like atmosphere going forward. But I think the big thing is his role has just been constantly changing.
Yeah.
But you can also argue that he's been around enough to know what he needs to do to adjust on a game to game basis. But still, I mean, he's been very inconsistent, very hot and cold. And I think this is one of the risks or downsides of giving him a 4-year max contract that the Sixers should have been aware of. I mean, they probably are, but still at the end of the day, you're gonna need more consistency. Like you can't drop 33 against a lottery bound Hornets team and then 19 against the Spurs and 16 against the Celtics.
Right.
You're gonna need to even that out to about 24. And if he gives us an efficient 24 with like 4.5 or 5 assists a game, that'll be perfect. He just needs to be more consistent. And I don't know. I mean, time will tell if he can, but I don't know. I've loved what I've seen in some aspects, but others, it's been a little bit rocky.
Yeah, and shout out to Steven in the comments at Nooms for 9 saying, "Give me Ben Simmons level defense from PG and a competent offensive output, and I will take him all day long." It's interesting. Like I think a lot of the complaints that we have would be pretty similar to what Clippers fans would say. The shot selection, the variable level of play is fair to assess with him. I kind of my outlook and belief in Paul George kind of stem from the standpoint that I thought all those complaints, which are fair, apply much more like significantly when you're talking about a one or a two option. When he can be the third guy, which is really what the design is here that we've yet to see. Yesterday being just the third time all season that the three of them have started and finished a game, that like it still can settle in. So I haven't loved what I've seen from Paul George. The jury is still out at this point in time, but I'm not ready to hit that panic button just yet. And I still believe like there are the flashes where you see it. That we've seen the moments where it's like, okay, that's what this guy can bring. And even just like while he shot 0 for 7 from 3, you taking 7 3-pointers is still kind of a win in my book because there will be nights where he's knocking this down there. So let's slide off Paul George and speak about who is really the star of the show yesterday, with that being Caleb Martin there. So to speak on Caleb Martin, and I do want to dig into him pretty deep on this one, one. So he finished with 23 points, and let me pull up the full box score here. That for Caleb Martin specifically did have 23 points, shot 7 of 9 from 3, also added 3 rebounds, 2 assists, and a steal here. In the starting lineup, as you mentioned, Jacob, this was the first time that we saw what we perceived to be the starting lineup entering the season. So it's been a bit of a rocky start to the Sixers' tenure for Caleb Martin. He is very specifically a Celtics killer and a guy who has as much bad blood with this Boston organization as every member of the Sixers, and Joel Embiid himself pointed out post-game there. So what's your take from Caleb Martin yesterday, and is this the start of him getting back on the right foot?
Well, he definitely made Andrew Toney proud. I mean,
True
he
that.
really is he really is appearing to be the Boston Strangler, the second coming of him. And what we saw last night, that is the reason why the Sixers signed him
Yep.
through all his ups and downs, the regular season, nagging injuries. That right there is where he shows his value. That right there, because the Celtics, they held the Sixers to, I think, less than, I don't know, 16 points in the third quarter after all the momentum was on their side. The game was tied 82-82 heading into the fourth. And Caleb Martin shot 4 from downtown and had 12 points in the fourth quarter. That is why the Sixers paid him that mini bag, and that's what he will bring in the playoffs. Again, I don't care what he does in the regular season. Regular season, it's 82 games. You're going to have highs, you're going to have lows, but you need players like Caleb Martin to win a playoff series.
Yep.
And that's pretty much all I have to say. Just a simply phenomenal performance, especially his effectiveness off the catch. It's just a compliment to literally all of the Sixers' big three. This is why, I'm going to say it again. This is why the Sixers got him. Not for a random November game against the Detroit Pistons or Charlotte Hornets. It's games like these.
Yeah, he's a big game player. There's no doubt about that. He's proven that throughout his career already, and most specifically against this Boston Celtics team, which I love to see there. Has to send nightmares. I was loving seeing all the frustrated tweets from Celtics fans. Shout out to Dan Greenberg, who loves to chirp a little bit on Twitter with me there. But for Caleb specifically, I do think it's coming into form. That I think the biggest thing that he has struggled with this season, it's very clearly been that jump shot. And I am buying the belief that this was a shoulder impingement that he was dealing with. We could clearly see a little bit of a hitch in that shot, and he's always been a guy with a little bit more of a unique release. But he did catch up with, shout out to Kai Carlin of Sixers Wire, and spoke about that shoulder and said, quote, "It was definitely painful. Like, getting up towards a certain range of motion, it's kind of like an abrupt stoppage, just because you know what you're going to feel once you get to a certain range. And it's almost like your body kind of does like a defense mechanism where it just stops. You know what I mean? It's almost like, I don't want to feel that." So I'm glad we're not dealing with some thoracic outlet syndrome like in the Markelle Fultz days here, but it did look absolutely back with that 7 of 9 performance on the season. And kind of speak on his output overall and look at his stats. They are mild, just 8.8 points per game, 4.5 rebounds, just 30.5% from three. This was entering yesterday, that the percentage has climbed over 28% just off yesterday, that he made, I believe the number is 30% of his made three-pointers occurred in yesterday's game on the season. Some pretty nutty stuff there, but you're absolutely right that this is kind of a playoff outlook for Caleb Martin. So when speaking on that, we did kind of enter the season with the belief that that would be the starting five. We've seen other guys make their case. Obviously, Jared McCain was a bright spot until he went down. We saw Yabusele certainly shine in that role for stretches. What's your outlook on where Caleb Martin's role on this team should be? Should he be in that fifth starting spot, or what would you do with the lineups right now?
I think it kind of just depends on the matchup because, like I kind of said in my opening statement, with how much two-way versatility they had on the wings, they were able to match up with the Celtics so much better than they have been in years past, both offensively and also keeping up with Celtics' insane volume of three-point shooting. So I think in matchups against the Celtics, you're going to have to roll with that Oubre Martin like forward spot along with Paul George. But against bigger teams like the Bucks with like Bobby Portis, Brooke Lopez, Giannis, you may want to go Yabusele just to have some front court size. So it's all about the matchups, but that's just the luxury of having this much versatility between Yabu and Caleb. Obviously, the Sixers may, try to incorporate another like traditional four in the mix of the deadline, but who knows? But as it stands right now, they definitely have the versatility to compete with anyone, especially when they're healthy.
Yeah, 100% there. And I think yesterday was a proving that to the fullest extent against the defending champs, against the title favorites. And I will say, like, I was texting back and forth with one of my friends who's a Celtics fans. There's some real concern in the Boston fan base right now, and for good reason. That there was the loss to the Bulls. I believe they lost 3 of their last 5 here. I'm not going to say they're leaking water or looking poor to me by any means, but I do think there's things that team has to fix, and we'll see how that plays out. Obviously, a lot more to play. But to stick on the Sixers team, you mentioned Yabusele there. I was kind of surprised that he was not the guy that elevated to that starting role. Obviously, KJ Martin suffering an injury, a little bit of a stress fracture in his foot. I believe stress reaction is the term being used. So he's going to be out for a little bit. This is kind of a two-part question for starters. How much do you think that impacts the trade conversation regarding KJ Martin? And then I do want to we'll stick on KJ Martin for starters, since I think that's a little more of a brief conversation, and then transition to Yabu. But for KJ Martin, I'm kind of I feel bad for him from the stance of he was playing probably the most effective basketball of his career. Thought he was carving out a nice little niche for how he could be used in the Sixers team and really proving to be a real rotation player. So how much of a hit do you think this is to him from a personal standpoint of his role on the team? And do you think this increases the chances that we return to him being a trade chip here?
I think the two things kind of correlate because if you're Daryl Morey and someone who you think is going to improve the team is available on a trade market that matches KJ's salary, if you're Daryl Morey, you're going to be like, look what KJ did next to Embiid. Look how he impacted winning. And you kind of only have that sample size if KJ isn't like
Yeah.
healthy for the next few weeks. So if were to end his Sixers tenure on this note, it's a very positive one. He shined on both ends, and that's what you're going to try to do. It's kind of sell a potential trade. So I think there's that. But also with KJ, like to kind of go deeper into that, like he was balling next
Yeah.
to Joel Embiid. Like that front court was really cool because like I don't think Embiid has really had an athletic four next to him like that I can really remember. I mean, Robert Covington, I don't think he was athletic as KJ Martin.
No.
Definitely a better two-way player, but overall athleticism, I'm taking KJ. And like throughout these past few games, we've seen KJ make so many like insane help rotations with his athleticism, blocking shots, just kind of soaring in from the weak side. And it's just been super fun to watch because those opportunities have allowed the Sixers to get out and transition so many times, and those types of things swing games. So
Yeah.
KJ Martin's impact has just been phenomenal. But unfortunately, if you are a KJ Martin truther like I am, that may not be the best thing because Daryl Morey, like I said, could kind of use that to be like, look what KJ did in his time with us. Now you're going to give us whoever, and we're going to attach some draft picks, and that's that. So I don't know. I'm still with the belief that you don't trade him if there's nothing like insane available, and I'm still going to stand on that. But if there is a player like maybe Santi Aldama or someone like that, then yeah, you might want to do it. But again, he's been really solid. Hope to see him back, make a speedy and thorough recovery.
Yeah, 100% there. And still just 23 years old, still a guy that can grow into his game even more than he's shown. But you're absolutely right about it, the athleticism. And I think like we've used this comparison a lot when speaking about Nikola Jokic playing next to Aaron Gordon, but that's sort of the role that I can see KJ growing into. Like those backdoor, the baseline cuts, him being a lob threat the way that he is. I think there's a lot of potential there. And I think like his ability to be like a weak side rim protector that could rotate and help Joel, who is looking more and more limited in that category, particularly as from what we've seen from him this season. I think there's a lot there. So I think my bar for what I would trade KJ for has changed a little bit. You're speaking my language with Santi Aldama. You're not quite with the Dorian Finney-Smith conversation. And like, that's kind of where my outlook has changed is I think I'll say this. I think Dorian Finney-Smith is a whole lot better in the heads of people than he is actually on the basketball floor. He had an awesome run with the Dallas Mavericks. I think that was the best stretch of his career. I don't think he's really been that guy on too much of a consistent level. But any thoughts on Dorian Finney-Smith, since that is a popular trade target that is thrown around?
I think one thing I'll say in DFS's defense is that his three-point percentage has tanked since he's left Dallas. And the biggest reason for that is he just simply hasn't been on a team with great playmakers. Ben Simmons is not a great playmaker anymore. But I mean, he had Dennis Schroeder for a brief stint, but regardless, like you can't like really thrive in the role. Like he's a ceiling raising player, and you can't really thrive on a team who isn't a championship contender as a ceiling raising player. Like especially with a team like the Nets, where it's just really poor roster construction, which is obviously on purpose, but like
Yeah.
your skills can't really showcase the way you want them to in a situation like that. But like you said, like at this point, with how much Brooklyn values DFS and just kind of his lackluster production, I don't think it's worth like a KJ Martin trade.
Yeah,
So
that's how I feel as well on that. And by the way, really interesting interview with Cam Johnson on the Old Man 3, kind of speaking about the outlook for playing for a rebuilding team. Worth a listen for anybody out there. But to keep it with the Sixers team, let's talk some Guerschon Yabusele, man. He's awesome, dude. There's one of my like favorite role players that I can think of, and that says a lot because there have been some good options on this Sixers team. Just in yesterday's game, he played 21 minutes, finished with 12 points, 4 rebounds, an assist, and a steal. Shot 2 of 4 from 3, 4 of 9 from the field overall. Now, I think everyone's on the same page that Yabu rocks. It's awesome having him on the team. And where the conversation gets difficult is it is pretty unlikely that this man will be back next year. Now, do you approach that with the mindset of it is better to maximize your assets, to trade something for him? And if he's not going to be a super key part of this team. I think it's clear that he's going to have some sort of role, no doubt about it. There was no Andre Drummond yesterday, so maybe you can kind of talk about that as an increase in minutes, although I would argue he would be the better option for the way that Boston plays anyway. But I guess what's your thoughts on Yabusele at this point? Where are you at? Do you think this should be a guy talked in the trade conversations for maximizing an asset, or do you think you got to rock with him?
I think at this point, like we said, the Sixers are 8-3 in their last 11 games. I don't want to jinx anything, but it looks like they're finally gaining chemistry and getting healthy. And with that, they're beating teams like the Celtics. They're beating teams like the Spurs. So obviously they're in a win now state. And I don't think you risk that, especially with the team finally establishing some sort of rhythm. It looks like they're going to go on a little bit of a push to get back to 500 with their relatively easy schedule coming up. And it's like, this is a team who wants to win a championship. And Yabu definitely helps with that as a ceiling raising forward who can kind of do it all on both ends of the floor. And you don't just give away that just to like try to get a second round pick or two back. Like you're gonna want to hold on to that because like a Caleb Martin, that is the type of role player who swings a playoff game and a playoff series in general. So no, I don't think they should trade Yab solely due to the fact that they want to win now and they want to compete. But if it were reality, like if it was like 2.5 weeks ago where the team was like 8 games below 500 or whatever, and everyone was injured, I think it's a different conversation. But considering the fact that they're finally returning to form, I think they should hold on to him and still try to win now and have that approach at the deadline.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think if this is how things play out, that you stick with Guerschon Yabusele, he's a key part of your playoff rotation, and then he walks away in the offseason with a pretty significant contract, you just live with that. That is what it is. You hit a slam dunk on a minimum deal. That this is a guy who is well performing above his pay grade for what the expectations were. He's a far more polished basketball player than I ever expected to be the case here. The dude that just gets it as a decision maker. He's much more than what I kind of expected. He was obviously a fun story, a guy that has changed his game quite a bit since playing overseas, expanded as a shooter. You can kind of see the European influence on the way that he plays stylistically there. But to me, that's just kind of the risk you take. That if that's how things play out, I'm okay with that. I want this guy to be a part of this playoff run, and I do think he genuinely likes it in Philadelphia. I understand that this is a business, and this is a guy that probably is in the spot where he wants to maximize his money and take whatever he can get, and I totally get that at this stage. But I do think there is, I guess, a non-zero chance that he just decides, I like it here. Let's stay, even if that is a little bit less money. That's probably a fairly optimistic view or an unlikely view there. There's really not even some cap gymnastics that they can do. This is more about like based on where they're at. They're not going to be able to be the best offer on the market. I would be pretty shocked if that was the case, unless he falls and has a much worse second half of the season. But I'm not sure I see that from Yabu. But I agree with you. I think you got to rock with him. I don't think there is a world in which it's worth maximizing on that as a trade asset rather than having him as a guy that can clearly help swing a playoff series. So I'm in on Yabusele. And to ask you a further question about him, do you find his role best as that kind of small ball center, playing the five, playing five-out basketball, or do you like him next to a guy like Joel Embiid, where he is that true power forward floor spacer? What do you think is ideal for his game?
I'm gonna say it again. Honestly, I truly think it is a matchup thing.
Okay.
And Nick Nurse has said a few weeks ago, like he said, like he'll roll out a lineup, and if he sees something he doesn't like, he'll adjust it at half. So I think it's sort of a case there. And you kind of said that Yabu like is kind of the ideal backup five against a team like the Celtics, and you're absolutely right. So again, it is just a matchup thing. Yabusele, his versatility, it just makes it so much easier to do so many different things. Like he is a backup five who can stretch the floor. He's also can be that traditional power forward who can, kind of fit next to Embiid to kind of combat front court size from opposing teams. So yeah, it is a matchup thing. Like you have teams like the Celtics, then you have bigger teams like the Thunder. So like yeah, it's just something that kind of should be on a game by game basis. But that's the luxury of hitting a home run on a contract like this.
Yeah, no, you're 100% right there. Now, to speak on some minimum guys that I would not say they hit a home run with, let's talk a little bit about the bottom of the bench. So, obviously, Jared McCain was such a positive storyline for the Sixers team. Very clearly brought something, a necessary spark of just offense that he injected into this team, and a guy that was clearly much more ready than I think any of us expected for that role. He goes down with a meniscus tear, and while the Sixers have not officially ruled him out for the season yet, it does not seem likely. And I do think there's probably a world in which they're kind of evaluating how these next couple weeks go and seeing if there's any chance or if it is worth it to try and bring him back. Obviously, he's just 20 years old and has a bright future ahead of him, so this is not a situation in which I expect them to rush it. But what that does put this Sixers team in a spot at is you got to make up for those guard minutes. Now, Tyrese Maxey is obviously excellent. We've talked plenty about him, but when you look beyond that, it is the guys like Kyle Lowry, the guys like Reggie Jackson, the guys like Eric Gordon, and I do think that we should have a conversation of, is this enough as a second unit from a guard standpoint here? I also want to add into this question, what are your thoughts on Nick Nurse kind of pairing Reggie Jackson and Kyle Lowry? I guess if either one of them might not be good enough, so maybe if you try both of them together, it would work. But what's sort of your outlook on kind of the guard rotation beyond Maxey at this point?
In the year 2024, this is such a funny group of options
Yeah.
between Reggie Jackson, Kyle Lowry, and Eric Gordon. Like, it truly is hilarious. I just can't get over it. But I think without McCain, I don't think there is much of a choice. I think you kind of have to play, Kyle Lowry and Eric Gordon, and not Eric Gordon, Reggie Jackson together, because like without McCain, like the depth is so depleted.
Yeah.
I've been trying to make an article on my Substack about this, but I'm waiting for a loss so we can be in a little more of a negative mood to kind of bring this up. But no, I think it's just a bunch of bad options. But I will kind of give Kyle Lowry credit. He stepped it up against the Celtics and the Spurs. He made a lot of little winning plays, kind of generated advantages to kind of lead to some ball movement. So he has been solid these past few games. Obviously, at his age, like that type of thing isn't too sustainable. Reggie Jackson, I've been kind of campaigning for the Sixers to play him more,
Hmm.
but he also gives us like it's just a bad situation. Like he's not giving anything. Like he's just a play finisher, but he obviously just can't do it at a high level anymore. Eric Gordon, like how do I put this? Like he just gives he gives absolutely nothing. Like on both ends of the floor, he's just been an absolute non-factor. He like maybe he can hit a few threes every other 3 games, but like the guard depth of like McCain being out is just so depleted, and I think that may be one of the biggest concerns because if you're in the playoffs and you're playing either or like a group of Reggie Jackson, Kyle Lowry, and Eric Gordon, that's not going to end well for you whatsoever.
No.
And it's just kind of like a testament to how good McCain has been because we're really discussing like a McCain replacement. Like that's just how amazing he's been.
Yeah.
But like, yeah, I really don't have a clear answer for you between who of the 3 plays, and it's just a lot of bad options at this point.
Yeah, no, I think my ultimate answer is probably none of these guys are good enough. I'm in agreement with you that Lowry, I think, has been the best of the bunch. And I mean, he's certainly not who Kyle Lowry once was as a basketball player. All these guys, it's the same kind of conversation. I appreciate the little things that Lowry still does as far as running an offense, being a grown up capable of making entry passes, still the annoying stuff to draw fouls. And he's still been just fine from beyond the arc from the overall season. Started the season incredibly hot from three, has cooled off from that. I just don't feel the same way about the other guys that Eric Gordon specifically. If you're not hitting 3-pointers, then what are you doing out there? Because that is really his only role. And I'll also say I entered the season with a fairly positive outlook on Gordon. I was impressed with what he looked like with the Suns last year. He just does not look like the same guy physically whatsoever. There, like what specifically stood out to me last year is I thought he could attack a closeout better than I would have expected at this stage in his career. I saw many nights where he was comfortable pump faking a three and attacking the basket. We haven't seen that a single time in a Sixers uniform to my memory here. So I'm pretty out on the Gordon experience. And for Reggie Jackson specifically, he's kind of a vibes guy is my feeling on Reggie. Like I have no problem with him getting a little run out here, but sort of my read or my feel is that he's not a guy that Nick Nurse like trusts to run an offense or fits into the flow of things there. So I don't know. I think my ultimate outlook is they have to have a better option here. A name that has jumped out to me is Dennis Smith Jr. as a guy that you can take a flyer on, that he's just sitting there in the G League right now. But I'm interested to see. I do think it is incredibly complimentary of McCain that we're having this conversation as far as they need to replace his minutes. But I do feel that I don't think their guard options are currently good enough, and that will be an issue come playoff time.
No, 100%. Like Dennis Smith Jr. is a great option. I don't know how the cap implications would work if you would want to waive like Gordon or Reggie Jackson. Obviously, in a perfect world, I would do it and just pick him right away because he really is an underrated guard who I'm surprised didn't get like a contract because Chris Dunn
Yeah,
got like a solid little contract from the Clippers, and
playing well.
Dennis Smith Jr. kind of offers like those same type of talents, kind of like a lesser scale, but still, it's he would be so much better than what the Sixers currently have like and he would take a minimum deal. Like it would almost be like another home run situation, like with the Yabusele contract. But yeah, I mean, there's not really any great backup guards on the trade market right now, and like a lot of them are kind of out of the Sixers price range. Like Trey Jones comes to mind, but he makes like 10 mil, and it's not worth trading someone like KJ for Trey
Yeah.
Jones. It's just not. But I think a fun name that actually comes to mind, and I'm being 100% serious, is Shake Milton. Like,
Okay.
I think he's making 2.8 mil. I mean, it'd be very easy to get him, I'd assume. Probably just a minimum salary and second round pick. So I think if you're the Sixers, I mean, wouldn't hurt. I mean, we've seen Shake Milton take over for many stretches when the
It's true.
team was injury depleted. So yeah, I mean, I would personally love a Shake Milton reunion because at this point, what better options do you have?
Yeah, I don't hate that. I thought you were gonna go the Markel Fultz direction, which I've seen thrown around plenty.
Nah, I mean,
Yeah, I wouldn't not I guess fully against it, but I think sometimes maybe things should be left in the past. Is I guess kind of my feeling a little bit there. But I don't hate the Shake Milton shot. He's not a guy that I has gone on to excel beyond the Sixers world in his NBA career, and I've been a little bit surprised at that. I thought he was going to be a change of scenery candidate that did benefit from that, but ultimately we'll see what they end up doing on that. I do want to stick on kind of the outlook for the Sixers here. So I'm seeing the comments sparking up a little Knicks versus Sixers debate here, which I love it. Keep going at it. People love to hear it. And Jacob, I'll phrase it a little differently before I dive into this specific matchup. We entered this season with the belief that this Sixers team is absolutely contenders. It's been as ugly of a start to the year as we could possibly imagine with this. Do you still feel that way? And how many teams do you think are clearly better than them in the East right now?
So I do think they're still championship contenders, and I
Love it.
think yesterday proved that. I don't obviously like I don't typically like overreacting to one game, but we are seeing what this team is capable of when healthy. And that's not me saying they're a championship favorite, but when healthy, they can compete with literally anybody.
Yeah.
As far as teams straight up better than them in the East, I would definitely have to go with the Celtics for sure. I would probably go with the Knicks, but that's okay. I'm kind of scared to say that, but no, I would go with the Knicks. But the main reason is sample size because we've seen how effective Cat has been as an offensive player. We've seen Brunson thrive in this offensive engine type of role. Mikal Bridges finally finding a rhythm. OG Anunoby's had a very like under the radar, amazing two-way season.
Yeah.
So I think for the time being, the Knicks are better. The Bucks, I'm still putting the Bucks at the same tier as the Sixers, and the Cavs have also a sample size thing have been better. So I'm putting those three teams above them as of this very moment at 8:02 p.m. But things can definitely change. But yeah, as far for the Sixers, like again, they can compete with anybody in the East and West. It's just a matter of them gaining that chemistry and getting some actual games under their belt.
Yeah, no, I'm with you there. I still wholeheartedly believe this Sixers team is absolutely still a championship contender. I'm not here to puff my chest out as they still sit 11-17 and have my debate about the Knicks outlook, but I will say I'll be buckled up for battle if that is a playoff series and it does feel destined to happen. But I guess where my outlook would be is every single issue that we've talked about with the Sixers team has been purely internal. That this isn't an opportunity of I look across on League Pass and see a team that watch the Celtics play and think there's no world the Sixers can be better than that, or watch the Knicks play and think they just can't produce at that level. I don't feel that way. We just haven't seen it. And obviously, the Joel Embiid injuries, Paul George has been injured, Tyrese Maxey's been injured. Everything that could go wrong has gone wrong to start this year for the Sixers team. But that's also kind of encouraging to me because we haven't seen things go right yet. That there is a world in which things can shake out differently, and we know how many bizarre issues there are with the Sixers team. So maybe they are just getting them out of the way early. So I'm still feeling pretty confident from a playoff setting, and just think this team needs to work things out, get more time to build some chemistry, learn to play with each other, and they have the opportunity to do that for the remainder of the season. And it's also good, like a game like yesterday, to build up a little like being battle tested and going through those tough games. They need to do all these things. So still a long ways away until we're having that conversation. But I do want to acknowledge that we almost did not even get to see the matchup that we all had in our heads. As pregame yesterday, Joel Embiid fell into the front row taking a turnaround three during pregame warm up and grabbed at his ankle. This is Jared Weiss to first report that. He needed a minute to get back up. He finished out his shooting routine and then walk back to the locker room. Now, Embiid did return to the floor, did play just as normal, and played pretty well yesterday. So not a huge complaint here from the Joel department, but just another one of those, it's only Joel Embiid and it's only the Sixers moment. So, Jacob, what was going through your head when this happened here, and any other takeaways on the situation?
I mean, as soon as I saw that, I fired up my laptop, opened up Photoshop, and started to pre-make the Joel Embiid will not play against the Celtics graphics. So I was
Yeah.
honestly ready for anything. And like you said, I mean, only this happens to Joel Embiid. I don't know how that happens. Obviously, I don't know how like in arena prepping goes, but like if you see a 7 foot player taking fadeaway jumpers beyond the 3 point line, why would you put out that rope that he could potentially trip on? Like I just don't get that part from TD Garden. It's kind of funny that it happened in Boston. I mean, who knows if it's coincidence? But no, all jokes aside, that was absolutely ridiculous. But I think he said to Kai Carlin, I don't have like the full quote or anything, but I think he said his ankle was like good as a little sore. So it wouldn't shock me to see him questionable against the Jazz on Saturday, especially considering the opponent. But at this point, I mean, I'm glad he played. I'm glad he toughed it out. And
Yeah.
I think it's something that kind of went unnoticed between like Maxey's heroics and Caleb Martin's like flamethrowing shooting is the fact that they won a game of that capacity with Embiid only having to play, what is it, 27 minutes or something like that?
31. Only shot the ball
31.
15 times.
That's and it was efficient.
Yeah.
So like that right there is huge. Like you kind of said it as we started this, like the way they're leaning on Tyrese Maxey to be their 1A scoring option. I think that is the best formula for this team going forward, and especially in the later years of this Paul George contract,
Yeah.
assuming the Sixers are stuck with it, because Paul George isn't getting any younger, neither is Joel Embiid. So you're gonna have to kind of lean into Maxey as he enters the peak of his career. So I do kind of like this blueprint, especially against the Celtics team, who was very much the championship, probably still the championship favorite this season.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, and by the way, that's especially forced me into this like forget the Cooper Flag sweepstakes or forget this being a lost season because your odds of these guys being having a healthy season do not increase next year. When Joel Embiid is 31 and Paul George is 36, it only gets worse and worse when we're looking down the pipeline here. So I do think you got to maximize every opportunity, and that does feel like what they're back on track to. Now, I did want to also add to the Joel Embiid conversation. Let's talk a little bit about that Spurs game. So a referee just disaster class from start to finish. Some stuff that I really have never seen before as far as Andre Drummond being ejected and then unejected and coming back in the tunnel, checking back on the floor. But we did.
me like post to see that was definitely the worst officiated game I've ever seen in my entire life.
Yep.
I don't know how that whole Andre Drummond thing can happen. It's a reffing standpoint. I don't know if refs get fined if they do it like in like a disclosed manner, but like I feel like in that case, if they do get fined, it should definitely been shown to the public because that was absolutely outrageous. Like I don't know how that happens without penalty, and I hope she did get like a minor fine, but obviously no one's perfect, but still stuff like that can't happen in a game. The whole Andre Drummond thing, disgraceful. But Embiid, I understand the ejection to some degree because he definitely did lose his cool, and that can't happen. But with that being said, I mean, those two calls that Embiid and Drummond got called on were just straight up very questionable.
Yeah.
And I do understand Embiid's frustration. And it looked like in the footage that we saw, obviously the camera angles weren't the best as the broadcast kind of like, kept replaying stuff. Like we see Embiid kind of get frustrated, but she just wouldn't acknowledge him, which kind of got him to get more frustrated. And
Yeah.
then the whole thing kind of entered a boiling point. But when she ejected him, that's when he started like throwing his mask. Like he
Right.
wasn't doing that when it had initially happened. So I think the whole thing of Embiid trying to get into like a ref's face kind of got overblown. But
Usually
yeah, I
does with
think it
him.
was just it was a very bad situation from like every standpoint. So I think hopefully we kind of move forward from this. And funny enough, it looks like Andre Drummond walking out of the locker room appears to right now be the turning point of the season. So
Yeah, very well could be that. This could be our New York Mets grimmest moment was Andre Drummond walking back on the floor here. But yeah, I mean, I am a root of the issue guy that I think a lot of this would have been avoided if there was just a little bit better refereeing. Like the ejection of Drummond was especially egregious to me. Like because at that moment, like we saw obviously the first technical, Drummond was as animated and as angry as maybe I've ever seen it. Like calling Wembanyama soft, trying to look at him eye to eye, and like as they're setting up for the inbounds, like I was fully just focused on what's happening there, and as I think most people were, because that was kind of what built it up. And then it was just such a clear like not shove or just trip or fall and flop, whatever you want to use the words here. And I'll add like to add to the refereeing malpractice here for Maxey to make that technical free throw and then it be taken off the floor. Just absurd that all happened. So I do think that was a mistake there. And I'm with you on, as is typically the case with Joel Embiid, things get overblown. And I do think it should be distinguished that he didn't really lose it until he was already ejected. That's when it was kind of no holds bars, letting him have it. Now, granted, I still wish Joel Embiid had a little bit more of a turn the other cheek, especially at this point in his career, that they've just played so few games together that this isn't just a throwaway regular season game. In other situations or other years, I may look at it be that way, that I was frustrated that he got thrown out of the game. Now, ultimately, they did find a way to win. Tyrese Maxey carried things, and that is really the bigger story than the refereeing altercation overall. But the Joel list has been quite absurd this season, man. In all the years of Joel Embiid, I think this has been the most bizarre storylines ever. But I do think that is the takeaway once again. It was Tyrese Maxey steering the ship. So as we approach this home stretch of the season, not even home stretch, still the meat and potatoes to go through at this point, but climb up the standings here. Is Tyrese Maxey officially in the driver's seat for this franchise, Jacob?
I don't, I think it's a very difficult question to answer at this point
Okay.
because Embiid really hasn't had too much of an opportunity to showcase like an MVP caliber type of impact. He's been okay in the games he's been in, like he's been solid, but a lot of weird things have happened where he hasn't even played full games, so his stats are obviously affected by that. But I think with how, they're designing Maxey to be the 1A option in games against the Celtics, games against the Spurs, I think it's definitely trending in that direction. I think as of right now, it's definitely still Embiid's, but maybe a year from now, we're having a completely different conversation because I think it's kind of symbolic more than anything else because through everything, through all the Embiid drama, throughout the Embiid injuries, throughout Paul George's knee issues, who has been there through it all? I mean, besides a little like 1 week injury stretch, it's been Tyrese Maxey. Like
Yeah.
he's been competing, whether he's playing with Jared McCain and Eric Gordon or whether he's playing with Joel Embiid and Paul George. So I think it's kind of like a symbolic thing more than anything else. But I think it's just really a matter of time before he kind of takes over as the face of the franchise. I think Joel Embiid even said as such like last season. So I think yeah, this will definitely be Tyrese Maxey's franchise in the very, very, very near future.
Yeah, I certainly approached this season believing that that was in store in the long run. It's happened at a far more rapid rate than I expect to be the case. And now it makes a lot of basketball sense. Like we've kind of had these conversations before, just in the modern NBA, how difficult it is to build around a big man, and more specifically in like those final stretches of creating looks for them. That there's just a lot more that you can run when you have a perimeter-oriented wing or guard to free them up with screens or run sets to create looks. It's just like creates a lot more diverse offense there, and I think Maxey's wholeheartedly running with those. Embiid is still going to get his and have his nights where he looks like the clear-cut best player on the floor. There's no doubt about that. But very encouraged with kind of the developmental arc that we see from Tyrese Maxey. So we don't got to dig too much deeper into that at this point. Overall, the highest spirits that I think we could have in the Sixers universe so far this season. So Jacob, the final thoughts from you here. Are the Sixers officially back?
I think they are. I mean, especially when you look at the schedule they have, they play the Utah Jazz, and
Yep.
then they play, I believe, the Portland Trailblazers, or they play the Kings in there somewhere, the Warriors. So they have a very manageable West Coast trip. I mean, in a perfect world, they can beat every one of those teams. I do think they end up maybe losing one, so they'll go 3-1 in the next four. But even then, you're still like maybe what four? My math is terrible, but I think you're like maybe only 4 games below 500. And I think at that point, you're definitely at least in the play-in picture. And
Yeah.
as this team continues to get healthy, as they continue to establish chemistry, they're only going to soar up the standings from here. I don't expect them at this point to finish as like a top 3 seed. I mean, top four would be the absolute dream, but like I think if you can finish somewhere like fifth or sixth, I think that's a really good way to end this. What's been an absolutely hectic regular season. Obviously, we haven't even hit the new year yet, but hopefully, like you said, all of this crazy stuff is like behind them now, and they can finally just focus on playing basketball and like kind of just embracing winning now at the deadline. So yeah, it looks like good times are ahead for the Sixers, but I think we've said that maybe the last two podcasts, and that hasn't ended too well. But for now, things are looking good.
Yeah.
That's all I got to say.
Currently 1 game out of the 10 seed, which would be that final play-in spot there. So as positive as an outlook that you could hope for at this stage. And I will also add, when kind of the playoff picture begins to be painted, I don't want this team ducking smoke. That I don't want just like a random, bad Indiana Pacers team, Orlando Magic, who they played well, but obviously injury's been a factor there. Sign me
Oh
up.
yeah, watch your words there.
Yeah, yeah, they are. I mean, I do like the Magic. I think they are certainly building in the right direction, but I wouldn't consider them contenders just yet for this season. I want the Celtics or Knicks first round, man. That's what I want the first matchup to be. I hope the Sixers can climb to potentially that 6th seed, so we're not don't have to do the whole play-in dance. But what do you think as far as a concept of? I think you rip the Band-Aid off right away. You take on a real deal contender and you prove what it is. Like you're not going to get healthier as the playoffs move on. I say you give your best punch right out of the gate. Would you like it that way, or would you like a little warm-up match?
My only issue with that is you would do that, and that would be very physically taxing. I think Embiid and Georgia be gassed at the end of the series if they were to win that series. And if you play, it would almost be like a 2021 situation. You play like a young, fast team like the Orlando Magic or the Pacers. That could definitely be an issue when you think about like health and like physicality. Like I could definitely see like the Sixers kind of like overcoming a team like the Celtics or Knicks, and then kind of have like that party quickly spoiled by like a game 1 loss of the Pacers or like the Magic, where they just kind of have like a statement 20-point win and you're kind of already in a downward spiral. But I think on the plus side, you get one of the best teams in the East out the way. You'd be able to handle maybe a weaker opponent in the second round. Then you finally get to the Eastern Conference Finals.
There
Then
it
from
is.
there, who knows what could happen.
Yeah, 100% there. So we won't get too bogged down on that today. Obviously, a lot more basketball to be played, but finally, the tides are turning for this Sixers season. So appreciate each one of you guys getting involved in the conversation in the chat there. Make sure you're checking out Jacob, who's crushing it on his Substack right now, as usual with Sixers Country. Anything specific that you want to shout out, Jacob, before we sign off here?
Tomorrow, I will have an article on Tyrese Maxey in the works, kind of talking about how he's really just taken a leap these past 7 games as an all-around offensive player. I will definitely shout out his defense too, because he's
Yeah.
just been phenomenal on both ends. So definitely, be on the lookout for that.
Yeah, 100% there. So make sure you're tapping in with Jacob there at Sixers Country on Instagram, at jmoreno9, I think is what it is. What's their whole handle for Twitter?
Oh, Jim around 76ers.
76ers. There it is. So yeah, make sure you're tapping in with that. As always, appreciate each and one of you guys tuning in this video. Better days ahead for the Sixers team. We're going to be rocking from start to finish. So if you have not already, make sure you're smashing that subscribe button, dropping a like on this stream right here. Me and Jake will be back talking with you next.